Hi there, this is Andrew Ive from the Big Idea podcast, where we focus on food. Today we're going to be talking to Paul Bartels. Paul is the CEO of Mogale Meats, M-O-G-A-L-E Meats, from South Africa, focused on cell-based technology and antelope and other game meats. Really interesting conversation. Love to hear what your thoughts are after listening to it. Let's get into it. Thanks very much. Thanks for coming along to the Big Idea podcast. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the Big Idea podcast, where we focus on food. How are you today?
I'm very well. And yourself, Andrew?
Very well, sir. You look healthy. You look well. You got a little bit of an antelope in the background on the wall, so that might be a clue for people listening today where you're calling from. Why don't you tell us a bit about Paul Bartels and Mogale Meat?
Yes, well, welcome, Mahali Meat Company. We're the first cultivated beef and game meat company in Africa. And so we chose game meat because, as opposed to venison, which basically comes from your deer species, game species, we've got a variety of species in Africa. And of course, it's eaten widely in Africa. And we got the most unique tastes and flavors. So the idea was when this whole idea of cultivated meat came up, and over the last 2 or 3 years been following developments and saw this development and decided a year ago that we really got to get into this because there are all these advantages. So yes, we chose game meat. It's another name for it is wild meat, and they're very similar to beef, to your ruminant livestock species. Mm-hmm. So, but at the same time, we wanted to keep the beef story going because we know the advantage for the planet is so tremendous. So yes, we've got to keep the beef. We've got to do beef at the same time, and we've got to play as major role as possible going forward. Also from a conservation point of view, because again, we've got situations in Africa that we want to address with cultivated meat.
Wow, there's so much in there. There's so much for us to sort of unpack as part of this discussion. So you're the first cell-based or cultured meat company in Africa. There are conservation reasons why what you're doing is important. Also, the kind of from a food protein perspective in Africa, game meat is a large percentage of the meat that's eaten in the country. So focusing in on game meat versus a typical pork, beef, etc., chicken approach is what's necessary for the kind of consumption patterns in Africa. Let's kind of go down each of these, rabbit holes individually. Conservation. How does cell-based meat or cultured meat work or support conservation in Africa?
Good question. So my background is I trained as a veterinarian, and I've always been focused on wildlife. So how can you, as a veterinarian, save individual animals? And of course, that's what you do. You work with individual animals. And from that, I developed a biobank of tissue because, again, how do you make a bigger contribution? Well, you're not just working with individual species, you're collecting from a number of species on many occasions. You're working with other institutions. You build this biobank, and wow, you've got this whole tissue bank, which then can play a role in genetic studies, reproductive studies, et cetera. So that was kind of my history over the last 40 odd years. But then when I learned about cultivated meat, it occurred to me that, wow, here was an even bigger opportunity because you're tackling it from the other side. You're tackling it from what are people eating daily. And by playing this, by getting into that, it occurred to us that, wow, here we had this massive opportunity to not just save individual species or play with one or two populations, but through biobanking, but rather really get to a point where one can actually make a much bigger contribution. And And again, what better way to do it through our stomachs? Because if we're able to produce this meat, we're able to, like all the other advantages that we have with cultivated meat, in other words, less greenhouse gas emissions, less water use, because, by the way, we're a water deficient country. So we've plowed up everything we can plow up. And a lot of people don't realize that about South Africa, is that a lot of development has taken place already. So we're at a point where water deficiency is a problem. We actually had the town of Cape Town go to what was called day zero, where they ran out of water. They just ran out of water, a huge city. So we have all those typical Western identified, well, not just Western, global identified problems just in our country here. And so from a conservation point of view, how can we keep those areas wild, keep the wildlife in those areas, the game ranching fraternity, or what we call wildlife ranching, keep them going, in other words, as an additional income source besides tourism and ecotourism, which of course has now crashed because of COVID. So here was another method to keep the wildlife ranching and the nature conservation, or let them, shall we say, let them play a much larger role in nutrition, and more specifically animal protein supply to the population, and make sure that we're tackling the livestock production, or lessening the reliance on livestock production for animal protein.
So in sort of countries outside of Africa, we've obviously domesticated the chicken, the cow, the sheep, the pig, etc. I'm getting the feeling I'm getting the impression from talking to you that in Africa, game meat is I mean, what percentage at this point is game meat from a protein consumption in South Africa and other countries? Do you have a feel for that at this point?
Yes, well, the further north you go, the larger the role. So if you're looking at countries like Congo and Angola, those countries, let's say across the tropics, game meat, or there they actually call it bushmeat. Bushmeat plays a huge role in nutrition, animal nutrition for people. And, certainly, 2 or 3 decades ago, it wasn't a big issue because of the population size. But there's been a lot of entrepreneurs, and you can imagine, even in game parks, there's been roads that have been carved into the forests, into these reserves, simply so that people can get their supply chain of animal protein going. So it's a really big problem in Central Africa from a point of view of a whole lot of species, mostly your deer, your antelope species, and then even monkeys and even chimpanzees, etc. As you move further south and you get to the southern African countries like South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, it's become more organized, but, well, in a better way, shall we say, in the sense that wildlife ranching has allowed the natural area to expand a hell of a lot larger than what the national parks do. So by having a wildlife ranch, you're looking at a whole spectrum of biodiversity. But of course, one of the income streams from that is game meat. So there's game meat, there's ecotourism, there's day visitors, etc. So in this part of the world, it's become organized in that way. So and again, a lot of South Africans eat game meat because they can. There are these ranches. They have an oversupply of game species. The animals don't go in trucks to abattoirs like beef and pork starts off as. So the animals live a much more natural life for pretty long until the bad couple of seconds of their life when they get shot for meat. Obviously, we know beef is a complete, and pork and chickens is a completely different story. It's factory farming. It's hectic on from an animal welfare point of view, it's unacceptable. So at least with game or wildlife ranching, the animal has a bit of a chance, shall we say, until their last day.
I can still sort of hear the people listening to this who are, very focused on animal welfare, not necessarily appreciating the nuance of what you're discussing. No, but I mean, I totally appreciate it. One is factory farming, small spaces, not being necessarily having the space, the light, the access to a kind of a living standard. Whereas if you're in a game park where you may get hunted at some point in your life, but ultimately it's a more natural existence. Saying that, let's assume for the moment that not even an assumption. How does your activity as Mahali Meat and cell-based / cultured meat change the story? What can you do? How can you improve both the life of those existing animals and also from a conservation perspective? How does Mahali Meat and what you're trying to accomplish change the story?
Okay, so there's two, shall we say, channels of answers to that. The first is obviously from a beef point of view. There would be less animals on the range. You would take a biopsy from a calf. The calf can live its full life, and you've got your meat. And very similar to typically how we have in Western countries, that whole channel, how cultivated meat, more specifically from beef, can play a role there. So South Africa is an export country, and we can play a role. The other way this export can continue if we do cultivated meat, because of the fact that we also have issues with endemic diseases like foot and mouth disease. So for instance, the EU shut down export of beef from South Africa in 2010 because of this outbreak. So we believe that we can get past such shutdowns by using cultivated meat. And so it's good for the animal because you've just taken a small biopsy from the animal, or you've produced cell lines that can produce the same quality, texture, flavor, taste of that particular, let's say, beef breed. So we've got a whole bunch of beef breeds that we can do that with. In connection with the wildlife and the game meat, similarly, we've taken samples from young animals, so the animal still can live its full life in a photographic and ecotourism type of setup. You don't have to provide more and more land, be it for beef, be it even for conservation. There's a lot of, I think we've got almost 10% of our country is already classified for conservation, together with the game wildlife ranching fraternity. So what we really need to do is tackle it from the point of view that less maize is going to be planted, less land is going to be plowed. It's going to then support the nature conservation, the national parks, and the wildlife ranching fraternity by not having this pressure on that land to be plowed, to be transformed into something else. So this is going to be maybe, I mean, I've even heard comments from people in the States and various other places where they say, well, there's a lot of this land we can't do anything with, so we're going to just run beef on it. And we're saying, well, you're kind of right, because there's less water needed, etc. You're ranching your beef, but what about wildlife? So instead of having this land not doing anything and not producing something, you're producing a whole ecosystem of biodiversity. You're providing nutrition for the population, and you're providing income and for the people that are managing these pieces of land.
Okay, and how does that? I mean, I wonder how much of the dynamic of actually going into a game park and shooting, capturing, whatever whatever they actually do at the end of the day, is part of the equation, or if it's just about the game meat, and if you can create that game meat using cell-based technology and provide it to them as a protein source, you actually alleviate the pressure on those game parks, or do you actually do away with does that get rid of the game parks in a sense, because there's no longer a requirement to go and hunt the meat? Or it's kind of there's an interesting interplay of lots of different things here, and I'm trying to figure out how it all works together.
Yeah. So good question. So again, the approach is that a game park has very little income, or so we say it's only the big parks, like for instance our Kruger National Park. We might have 90 different parks in South Africa, but it's only really Kruger through ecotourism and in many cases foreign tourists that really makes a profit for the other game parks. So you need to look at how else can you generate income for these smaller parks that have these different species. So it's not a case of getting rid of the parks. It's a case of actually supporting it, because now that piece of land is used in such a way that we can keep our populations diverse, keep the biodiversity and the genetic diversity going, because that's very important. We need large populations to keep genetic diversity going. And I think from the West, we need to realize that in Africa, there's a different dynamic. We're eating meat. It's a meat-consuming continent. So in order to move in a direction that's going to be sustainable, we need to be moving into something like cultivated meat. It's absolutely critical that we do that. And that and obviously things like education is going to play a huge role. We're going to have to do a lot more of that. But there's also this export market. So, for instance, New Zealand and Australia export a lot of fresh deer meat to Europe. And pre-independence, South Africa, we used to channel that actually through New Zealand and Australia, unbeknown to Europe, or maybe known to Europe. But now that we have a democracy in South Africa, we've had to create our own markets, and this has now been shut because of endemic diseases, etc. So, we must understand that it's going to be quite a journey to get to the point where we are contributing to animal protein for the people of Africa. And the way to get there, and as we see it, is we need to obviously grab the low-hanging fruits, which is the international market, which is the high-end restaurants, and then to develop the IP around that related to our game or wild animal species going forward. So the market is there. It's about $1.6 trillion, the venison market. And obviously what we really want to do is penetrate the red meat market using game meat. So here we're having animals, we're keeping them in the wild, we're keeping that land for wild species, for genetic diversity, and yet we're eating them. And so we're generating another income stream along that way. So that's the philosophy behind our approach and the ecosystem that we want to develop within Southern Africa. So we've already got 2 universities that are very interested in this whole concept, and they are now actually starting to conduct research in that area. So very much like Tufts or UCL Davis, Tufts and various other universities. So we want to also be supportive of that, because we have to develop a pipeline of talent as well coming into the industry.
Got it. So now let's talk a little bit about Mahali Meats in particular. You said if we can do this, where are you in terms of proof of concept? Showing that this is an absolute eventual outcome. Tell us a bit more about the company so we can get a feel for how far you are in the journey and where you still have to go.
Sure. So we're a new startup. So we only registered at the end of 2020. So that's about this time last year. We put a whole lot of equipment together. We've got a lab set up. And then because of my history with biobanking and creating South Africa's national biobank, which is now at SANBI, our South African National Biodiversity Institute, where a lot of tissue was collected and banked, including cell culture. So we come with a history of cell culture. And so we put this project together. And from there, we started in about April, May this year to collect samples from various species. So we currently have 10 species. It might even be 11 now. And then got biopsies, separated the cells out. So we've got lines of adipose tissue or mesenchymal stem cells. We've got myoblasts and we've got fibroblasts all running in parallel and then banked into a master bank. So we've built up over 700 isolations already. From there, so that's our basic 2D production. And more recently, we've gone over to benchtop 3D production or benchtop bioreactor production. At the same time, we had to do some parallel work with some scaffolding. So the idea being that we get to a hybrid product. Well, first of all, there's pâtés, for instance. So then we can use our general cells and obviously scaling that up. So we're busy with some scale-up studies as we speak, so that we can get our numbers up. And so from that, we're going to look at, for instance, first of all, your thin-cut meats. So like your Springbok Carpaccio, which is only 1 millimeter thick, similar to your beef, smoked beef slices, etc. So we're in some discussions with some chefs here in South Africa, also a kitchen. And so we hope to, well, we've not hoped to, we will be dealing with that by February this year, because I'm not sure if I mentioned that we're the only team from Africa. We entered the X Prize Feed the Next Billion. So we were the only team selected from Africa. And yes, we unfortunately had to choose, well, fortunately, unfortunately, had to choose chicken because they gave a choice of fish or chicken. And we wanted to add some of our wildlife bird species, like, for instance, the ostrich, but they said no. But anyway, we're going flat out with that too. Fortunately, we can run parallel processes with chicken as well, so that we can get to the finals, which is in this time next year, where 10 teams will be chosen out of the current 28 teams that are on the team. But we're using that to actually speed up our processes, because we're obviously under quite a lot of pressure as we speak. So there's a lot of running around at the moment. We've got a whole bunch of incubators running with lots of different species growing nicely. So we're actually very excited about some of the wildlife species. Back to the wildlife species, we're actually very excited with some of them, because there's some cells that are growing absolutely tremendously, unexpectedly so. So, that's basically part of our IP that we're busy developing. So, yes, again, as we have to admit, we're a young startup, but we've got some very, very motivated staff and actually volunteers that are working with us.
Now, you mentioned you've collected 11 or 12 biopsies, different animals, different samples. You also took us through, for example, the first product, which is the Carpaccio concept. Is there an 80-20 here where certain breeds, certain animals, from a game meat protein perspective, is the equivalent of the American burger? Like, is there an animal breed and a product which is 80% of the volume, and thereby, if you can focus in on that particular breed or that particular product, you're covering a lot of the demand? Yeah,
correct. So when South Africa was doing a lot of export in the past, the species that was certainly the one that was sought after in Europe, more specifically France, Germany, was our Springbok. So there was quite a mass. Well, I haven't got the exact figures, but pre-2010, there was really good export. And in fact, we can process and export. And in fact, it is estimated that we're only meeting 10% of the demand of processed game meat export to Europe. So we're also exporting a lot of beef, for instance, to the Middle East. But again, coming back to that the venison, so there is this market already. What we really want to do from a regulatory point of view is obviously with cultivated meat, we've got more time points where we can do a lot more testing. So we want to be able to prove to the European authorities that they should open the export of game meat again to South Africa based on the fact that it's going to be coming from cultivated meat. So specifically that species springbok is one of the very popular species. But remembering that in the past it was simply called venison. Now, and a lot of springbok was added to the deer species that was coming from New Zealand. And in fact, it was the springbok that was more popular. So venison, which we now call game meat. So again, we feel that there's a great marketing opportunity going forward to hit the European market again. Our high-end restaurants here, obviously in South Africa, are very similar. There's a lot of game meat that is eaten in South Africa. So we intend to, we're planning for mid next year, towards the end of next year, or early the following year to have a product in some high-end restaurants in South Africa. Obviously, South Africa is going to be our first target. We have a person working on the regulatory issues. Typically, we follow the FDA, USDA regulatory issues, so we're following that very carefully. But at the same time, we've got the regulatory pathway that was used in Singapore, for instance. So we're making sure that we're addressing a number of issues going forward related to that.
Okay, let's kind of cover that off very quickly. So one, you've mentioned originally shipping meat, or you're as a country shipping meat, a springbok, venison, etc., game meat via New Zealand and other places to Europe. Because of challenges in terms of disease and other things, that's stopped. Your sort of premise is cell-based meat, cultured meat will be able to resurrect that because it's not got the potential for contamination, disease, etc. It's a cleaner way of providing the same protein. Europe, as we both know, is not allowing cell-based meat for human consumption at this point, right? So
correct.
So there's a couple of things that need to happen here. One is you need to scale your business. Two, you need to get Europe keen on the idea of buying the product from a cell-based perspective. And then lastly, we kind of need Europe to open the floodgates and allow cell-based meat to be sold for human consumption. Do you have a view on, and then there's the other piece of the equation, which is what is the regulatory environment like for you right now in Africa? So can we take the regulatory environment in Africa first? Right. And then maybe follow up with where are you thinking Europe is going from a regulatory environment perspective? So first, what's the regulatory environment for cell-based meat in Africa?
Yeah, so of course it's all new in South Africa, just like many other countries, and hence we have one of our advisors who has worked on game meat export to Europe. Mm-hmm. For instance, what is open is if you have a quarantine type situation on a wildlife ranch, then you can get regulatory approval to export that meat. Now we're talking about fresh meat, we're talking about slaughtered game meat. So that pathway is there. So obviously we need to wait for the issues related to Europe to catch up, and we're hoping that the cultivated meat companies that are based in Europe are going to be pushing from that side. From our South African side, we've decided to tackle it from the point of view of what can we help right now? Because if you wait for regulatory people to do that work, it's a never-ending wait. So what we did was we started actually working on that with our consultant, or actually she's part of our team because she's been working on regulatory issues of fresh meat to Europe through that quarantine type setup. So hence we're working on that, and the idea is that we will have some paperwork ready to submit within the next couple of months, so that we can actually fast track the issue, so that we can actually do the work for the people that should actually be doing the work. But we also understand the challenges that they have, not understanding this whole new process and this whole new way of producing animal protein going forward. So we need to help push that along. So yes, so it's not there aren't any regulations at the moment in South Africa. We're also talking to some possible partners in Singapore, where obviously it is possible to sell the meat commercially. So it might be that at some stage next year, towards the end of next year, early the following year, as soon as we try to be at a position that we can actually supply our high-end restaurants here, and that our regulatory issues are more advanced, to be able to actually export also to Singapore.
Okay. So Singapore is going to be the first market, basically because from a regulatory perspective, they've already approved it as a general. Will you need to get approval for venison and springbok in particular in Singapore, or is that regulatory environment sort of lifted across all meat types as far as you're aware?
As far as we are aware, well, they do specify the species, but again, we've been assured from the Singapore side and through Big Idea Ventures, of course, we're very excited that you've introduced us to all those different key players in Singapore. So we've kind of been assured that, hey, get your paperwork right and submit. Mm-hmm. We don't see big problems. But obviously, it's the proof is going to be in the pudding, eating of the pudding. So we need to do that and get that submitted. I don't see huge problems in that area because, as I say, South Africa has been an export country. We are exporting currently fresh beef to the Middle East, and again, processed meat, both game and beef, to Europe. So it's not like there isn't, already channels but obviously it has to now be linked to cultivated meat, so a new process. So whatever testing needs to be done. So we've been working very hard recently on all the compliance issues related to food and food safety, etc., going forward, because that's obviously going to play a key role.
So from a scale-up perspective, what kind of volume do you think you'll be able to get to by the time you're, ready to start selling in Singapore? Is this a, one restaurant, an occasional dish, get it rolling, get people excited about this approach to venison? Or, is this something from a volume perspective that actually could be in the short to medium term a revenue generator for you?
Yeah. Well, obviously that's the $1 million question. So having a look at trying to predict some of that is not very easy. But having said that, if one, for instance, looks at some of the cell lines that we've got going at the moment, we're very excited about it. And by the way, it's not 10 biopsies that were taken, it's from 10 species. Sure. So we're talking about 100 or more biopsies that have been taken. So it's we've got a lot of cells. We have various machines working at this time, including benchtop bioreactors. We've been very fortunate to get some going already, and we plan to look at, obviously, following the industry. We're following it very, very carefully. We want to do some leapfrogging because I think everybody wants to do that. We're looking at the big boys. We're trying to figure out a whole number of things at the same time.
Leapfrog. Help me understand. Make sure we're on the same page. What do you mean you want to do some leapfrogging?
Well, if we consider that a lot of the current companies might have been operational or working in this area maybe before they came out of stealth, they could have been working for up to 5 years or more on some of these processes. And obviously what we are trying to do is we want to leapfrog. We don't want to spend the next 5 years doing basic research. So that needs to be left to the academic institutions, and hence we also linked to two of our academic institutions with the purpose of certain of the aspects that we don't see as an IP issue, to get them to do some of that work, which they are actually now doing, and in that way leapfrog. Obviously, it's a bit of a dichotomy. We've got companies that really want to produce a lot of this product because of animal welfare, but at the same time, there's a lot of IP being protected. And so each of these companies has to produce IP. We think the fact that institutions like New Harvest and GFI are doing the most amazing stuff. So we're obviously following them very carefully and interacting with them, because getting back to that, we need to leapfrog. So we want to leapfrog some basic stuff so that we can get to a point that we are ready towards the end of next year and the beginning of the following year to at least have a product for some high-end restaurants. So it will, unless there's a major breakthrough, which is not impossible, again, because we're working with a couple of different species which are showing tremendous promise. So it's not impossible that there's going to be a breakthrough.
Got it. Given there's a kind of conservation aspect to this, is the South African government engaged? Are they excited about what's happening with you guys? Are they supporting your activity or not at all?
At the moment, there isn't any support except from the regulatory issue where our consultant, who actually is working in government in the health department. So from that point of view, there is movement, because we need to get that whole regulatory issue going. From the academic side, I think the government is, typically when you talk about this issue to government officials, it's a case of, what are you doing? We're going to be eating lab meat, and typically that's how it even started with the academic departments that we started talking to, a year ago when we started putting this thing together. But it's amazing how quickly the turnaround is in attitude. So we're very excited about that, especially the academic institutions, and we really don't see a big problem because I think a lot of the government officials realize that our population, just as an example, in Africa, we're going to put 1 billion more people on our continent in the next 30 years. Now, to try and visualize that and think about that, and think about the amount of protein that and food that we have to produce, and where the people want to eat meat, it's a massive challenge. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are realizing that there has to be some alternatives. So I think they're in that sort of space. We have to do something. Initially, we pulled our faces at the fact that, we're going to be eating meat out of a Petri dish. And it's now got to more of, hey, these are plants, they're breweries. They're not, this funny lab grown stuff anymore. This is now production. This is going to get into production, and we need to be there. We cannot allow this continent, and more specifically Southern Africa, to be left behind on this going forward.
Perfect. So from a help perspective, you mentioned the X Prize. Obviously, going through that competition, doing well would be great from a publicity perspective. The prize itself would be amazing. But I'm wondering what additional kind of help you guys could need, or what kind of help. For some reason, my sentence is not working very well today. What kind of help do you guys need moving forward? What's going to help you to leapfrog the guys that have been in this space for 5 years or more? How are you guys going to be able to bring, great products to market, Singapore, etc.? What kind of help do you need? Tell us.
Yeah, good question. I think the certainly the major issue, and we're seeing that with some of the other companies, is partnerships. Certainly partnerships and networking. So finding the right partners, and we do have one or two partners that have shown a lot of interest. In fact, one of the partners is assisting us already, and it's a case of those networks. So again, back to Big Idea Ventures. I mean, this was absolutely amazing. It was the doors that have been opened is absolutely amazing. Now what we need to do is to tie some of those contacts and those networking partners down, and we certainly aim to do that going into the new year, because that can make a massive difference. We know that we have to get to a position to develop a partnership with maybe one or two specific distributors going forward. That's going to be very important. So we are in some discussions, and that's going to make a big difference, because we're going to need some partners going forward, and we're very excited about the negotiations that have taken place so far, and obviously need to tie some of that down. So we're looking forward to that. It's very important to develop that going forward as part of our strategy going into the new year.
From a partnership perspective, are you working with any of the meat producing companies in South Africa or in other parts of Africa? Do they see this as a new way of creating product for their marketplace? How are you, if at all, interacting with the more traditional aspects of the South African protein industry?
Yeah. We actually have been in more conversation or more discussions with the external partners out of South Africa than internal. And I think one of the parts of our strategy for that is to get to a certain point where we can showcase what we've got. So we didn't want to speak too soon to some of the partners. The wildlife industry, for instance, has got some good distribution networks, etc. But we wanted to get into a position which we think we're now at. We think we're now at that place where we can bring some people in and start strategizing around that. So yeah, that's again one of the issues we're going to tackle now. We really didn't want to do it too soon because we wanted to have a little bit of substantial products in the sense of our collection of cells, discussing a little bit about some of the IP that we're busy developing at this time, so that we can see, okay, how is this going to work with our South African partners? So yeah, we're basically ready to start getting into that now.
What about from a funding perspective? Are there investors looking at this space in Africa/South Africa? Do they see this as an area where they should be investing their money, or is it still very, very early days and you're waiting for that financial community to sort of catch up to this?
I think the initial contacts that we've had, for instance, again through being showcased at GFI, where the X Prize semi-finalists were allowed to show what they were doing. And of course, through BIV, we've had on a weekly basis some interest, and so we're busy, and it's mostly from outside South Africa. So we've had South Africa doesn't have a lot of capacity in that sense from a funding point of view. So all our interest, I shouldn't say that we actually have had some interest, and there are some follow-up meetings that have been arranged from a South African group, but the majority have been from other countries, specifically Canada, USA. We're in negotiations at the moment with two potential VCs from the Middle East. So it's very exciting. We've got follow-up work to do, which we're busy doing at this moment. So there is definitely interest. I think some of them wanted to get in early, and hence we did get some funding from Canada and from the USA. And so again, I think it's looking very exciting going forward.
Now, there's many reasons why investors get involved in, investments, different businesses. If you guys are based in South Africa, one of the reasons why some investors might get involved in a company is because they anticipate at some point in the future there'll be an exit, some either acquisition or IPO. Those are the more traditional ways of exiting an investment like this. Your investors are sort of coming from outside of Africa. Do you see there being a need in the future perhaps to have Mahali Meat relocate and sort of start playing a more global role? Or do you hope that the financial community in Africa sort of comes through and ultimately supports the company and allows you to stay there, and there'll be a kind of natural exit for your business in the African market at some point in the future?
Yeah, so what we need to do is keep our eye on this space and see where to pivot towards. So I think that certainly partnership or let's say a headquarters in another country is definitely not off the radar. So in other words, we got our foot in Africa. We've got a big foot in South Africa, and so it's not impossible that. And in fact, we have opened a headquarters in New York as we speak. We're busy finalizing that, and so again, I think it's very important that we need to internationalize, shall we say. And then we'll check that space, keep our eye on the radar to see, and again with our advisors and from the people that we're talking to, see in which direction we need to focus. But again, it was very important to get the industry going here. It's and obviously that's a big focus. But certainly we see a massive potential in the future. It might not be in 4 years' time, it might not be in 5 years' time, but we see a massive potential in the next 10 years because of the fact that we've got this amazing product. It's an amazing product, and hence part of our focus is to really impact on the beef industry using game meat. So, and we see that has a massive potential. So, yeah, it's very early days, but we're definitely going to keep the options open going forward.
I mean, we're very excited about Mahali Meat and you and your team. We've obviously invested, so we're putting our money where our mouths are, as it were. You're doing amazing things. You're right. The product is really strong. It's also kind of an interesting product for marketplaces outside of Africa because venison and so on is in demand. So where would people find out more about Mahali Meat, about you, about your team, so that they can reach out and engage and help you achieve the vision of what this business can become?
Right. So obviously, we have a web page, mohalemeat.com, and
can you spell that for us?
Be reached.
Yeah, can you spell it for us?
Good question. So it's sorry, let me just grab something here. So yeah, Mahali. The name Mahali comes from actually one of the leaders 100 or 200 years ago, and it actually means the brave one. So again, we thought that it was appropriate for a young company to start and go into cultivated meat in Africa, being the first. So hence we said that. So Mogale Meat is spelled Mogale, Mogale. And we do it from the web page. It's one word, so it's mohalemeat.com. We obviously also on LinkedIn, so please look us up on LinkedIn and start a conversation with us. So it's I'll spell that out again: Mogale, Mogale, Moglae.
MEAT.com. I'm looking at the website right now. Healthy and nutritious meat grown from free-ranging livestock and antelope. Major contributor to biodiversity contribution. Same meat, different pipeline. Some amazing dishes on the website. You guys should really go check it out and see the kind of delicious things that these guys are moving towards. Very exciting. And obviously there's the enhancement of the biodiversity, the conservation aspects of Mahali Meat as well. And Paul, where would they reach out to you as the kind of founder and CEO of Mahali Meat?
Yeah, so again, a message can be sent through our webpage. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. So again, we have both myself, Paul Bartels, on LinkedIn, as well as Mogale Meat. So Bartels is Bartels. So it's Paul Bartels. So we have a LinkedIn link. Look me up on that. And yeah, please reach out. And we're looking to interact with as many individuals, partners, companies as possible. And we think this is, very exciting because it's going to be big one day. I know that. The world will know it soon. So very exciting too. And as you mentioned, that whole aspect of biodiversity and wildlife conservation, that's kind of been my passion from the start is how do we secure our wildlife at the same time with all the other great advantages that cultivated meat brings.
Perfect. And if you're involved in the X Prize, the Meat Our Future X Prize, Feed the Next Billion, by all means, give these guys a thumbs up and tell everyone how amazing they are. I'm sure that would be helpful. Paul, really great to speak to you. Thank you for your time today. If you've got any last things to say, we can absolutely say them. If not, I will pause the video and we'll end the podcast. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andrew. I really appreciate the chat. And from a biodiversity, wildlife point of view, this is a great way to tackle these issues from the biggest impact that we're having against our biodiversity and wildlife at the moment is too many of them are being eaten. So if we can still eat them, but still conserve them at the same time, wow, what a bonus.
Paul, thank you so much. Mahali Meat, everyone should go check you guys out, reach out to you. And if you can add some support to Paul or Mahali Meat, please do so. Thanks, everyone. And we'll be signing off now.
Thanks. Cheerio, Andrew. Thanks a lot.
I'm still here. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Paul from Mogale Meats, Mogale Meats.com. I think it's without the S, so meat.com. Please do reach out to Paul, or by all means reach out to me via Big Idea Ventures or LinkedIn. Happy to connect you with Paul or any of the companies we've been speaking to so far. Please do like and subscribe. We'd love to let you know when the next podcast is happening. If you've got any questions, please do reach out. That's it. Hope you enjoyed the conversation today, doing some amazing things in terms of biodiversity conservation and improving the game situation in Africa. So that's it. Have a great day. Bye-bye.